And good morning. It is time for the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by Renegade River in Spring Lake. And here's your host, Mike Hewitt.
Good morning. Listen, we've got a pretty good show today lined up. On the line with us is William Palumbo, who is the founder of the Coalition of Concerned Citizens, which is a group of researchers, retired military, analysts, and journalists focused on exposing the Muslim Brotherhood network that's working within the United States. But before we get to William and get into that topic, I want to do a little bit of a public service address, if I might. On the show, we've over the course of the last 2 or 3 months, we've had a number of guests on talking about the Dewey Hill Cross, and then the sign, the Psalm 19 sign down in Hager Park, which is Georgetown in Ottawa County. And there's a forum coming up tomorrow evening that I want to bring everybody up to date on. It's put on by the Ottawa County Patriots, and they've issued a number of press releases that are trying to get people to be aware of it. But what I find interesting about it is that they've attempted to start out with a forum that had both sides of the folks that are on this issue of should the cross be there, should it not, should the sign, and all of that. With I don't want to misquote, but the organizations that have been advancing the removal of those religious signages were invited to join in this forum and evidently declined even response. That said, they're still going to have a handful of people that will be make up a panel. It's going to be literally a panel of I'm reading it real quick here. But Reverend Tyler Wagonmaker of Hudsonville and Mr. Doug Van Essen, who's a lawyer. He's the guy that's advising the Ottawa Board of Commissioners. A guy named Stephen Coleman, who is an attorney from the Great Lakes Justice Center, and Brandon Hall, who's a citizen of Grand Haven, who's organized a recall against 1 or 2 of the council members that voted in favor of having the cross removed. And the moral of it is that tomorrow, Grand Haven Community Center, March 5th, starting at 6:30, there's going to be a forum. And the things that they're going to talk about, a little light, the First Amendment, does that apply to an individual or does it apply to a community? So if you and I are standing together and we both want to have public expression of our faith, is it just you and I separately, or are we together in that? Does it affect an entire community? And has what we've been watching been the result of bullying, literally using that word? Have the organizations advancing their cause against the community of Grand Haven and Georgetown, have they been engaged in bullying? And the effect of that means, because it's so expensive for these cities and the county to mount a defense, it's easier for them just to say, fine, whatever, and move on. And a lot of folks have interpreted that as bullying. But they're the bottom line is at that forum, they're going to have an opportunity for the guests to ask these people, these panelists, questions. And so if you're concerned with your First Amendment right and what's going on down there, I would encourage you to join with them. So if we might, let's get back to our regularly scheduled program with William Palumbo. William, welcome to the Mike Hewitt Show.
Thanks, Mike. Glad to be here.
Listen, tell me a little bit, before we really get into the nuts and the bolts of it, you founded an organization, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Tell me about the organization and who comprises it and what does it do?
Sure. So we were, founded basically because we were all concerned about the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is at its very root a fascist organization on the American government. And just to give you an idea of some people who are involved, we have journalists such as Andrea Shea King, Teresa Monroe Hamilton, Trevor Loudon, who's a terrific author and researcher of Marxism. We have activists such as Ashraf Ramallah, who is the head of an organization in the United States which speaks out for Coptic Christians who, of course, are really being persecuted because of what's going on in the Middle East. Charles Ortel, who's a columnist, retired Major General Paul Vallely, who, of course, is an outspoken critic of the administration. And then a number of, publishing blogs such as Right Side News, the Counter Jihad Report, Noisy Room, and actually many others. So, because of our backgrounds and subject matter expertise regarding Islam and the Muslim Brotherhood and national security, we decided that to amplify our voices, what we do is basically conduct collaborative research and look into the network of this organization in the United States and kind of bounce ideas off each other and just make sure that when we put a message out there, we did it in unison and together so it would be heard much louder than if it were just one of us.
Just so I can get my head around this right, you rattled off a couple things that made me pause for a minute. One of the things that I heard the word Marxist. Tell me what that means. What does that person do?
So Trevor Loudon is is a published author. He's been researching the communist infiltration in the United States government, for a long time now. He's a subject matter expert on kind of the communist infiltration. My understanding from the 1970s onward. Of course, that was a problem from the early Cold War, but he really is arguably the world's foremost expert on communist infiltration of the American government from the 1970s on, and he's regularly featured on radio programs and television.
I've got to pause for just to say, Trevor's been on this show a couple times, and I've met him. He's from, is it New Zealand or Australia? I can never...
He's from New Zealand.
New Zealand. In fact, as soon as I asked the question, a big grin broke on my face because I remember saying, "Are you from Australia?" And it was like he was very insulted. No, of course I'm not. So, listen, folks, he's an extremely intelligent person. Probably one of the most articulate people that I've ever met. Very well read, and to your point, he's an author. But the reason I wanted to come back to those words is I heard you say fascism, which I think most people relate to Nazi Germany, and then I heard you say Marxism, and then I heard you talk about the Muslim Brotherhood. Do you think that all these things are related?
Yes, I actually do.
Okay.
What a lot of people, don't realize when they think about the Muslim Brotherhood, if they think about the Muslim Brotherhood, is that it was founded at the same time, and it really grew up with the Nazi Party of Germany. So it was founded in 1928, and it had very closely aligned objectives to the Nazi Party of Germany. In fact, one of the most infamous Holocaust collaborators was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, whose name was Amin al-Husseini. He met with Adolf Hitler. He met with Himmler, the head of the SS. He even met with Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi behind the final solution, the creation of the concentration camps and death camps. And he was the head of the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine.
When you look at the Muslim Brotherhood, is the concern that is a branch of hard left-wing politics? Is that what we're saying? I say that because a lot of the dialogue in America anymore seems a lot more to do with hard left, hard right, Republican, Democrat, etc. So when we start getting into communism and fascism and these other isms, I think some people roll their eyes and think that that's just a lot of shrill hyperbole. So help me get grounded. Why is that not a bunch of shrill hyperbole?
Sure. So living in the United States, we appreciate certain rights, whether it's free speech or the ability to start and grow a business for ourselves and a free press. Well, we used to have a free press, but these are really antithetical to Marxism or communism, and certainly Nazism. What people need to wrap their heads around regarding the Muslim Brotherhood is that they are not interested in our freedoms. They're not really interested in democracy. If you look at what the president of Turkey said in the last few years, democracy is a train. We use it and we get off when we're there. So these people are definitely not interested in a free society. They're not interested in you having your traditional rights. What they're actually interested in is imposing Islamic law on the United States, which would, severely curtail your ability to speak your mind, to practice your religion as you want to, to enjoy the freedoms that really makes America America. So when, people throw around words like Marxism and Nazism, they need to understand what that really comes down to. And what it basically comes down to is your government telling you what you can and can't do, and when you can do what you can do.
It reminds me a little bit, William, of me stumbling through my public address in the first two minutes of the show. But my point, aside from that event, is going to take place tomorrow. To me, when a very small handful of people can tell an entire community that they cannot have something, this group is being politically correct by calling it bullying. To me, it's fascism. It is intimidation. And whenever I hear someone that I don't agree with, it isn't my first instinct to say, how can I shut them up and take them away from the... I would much rather be able to debate them and win in the arena of ideas. That's how I think. So these folks that want to silence opposition, which is really what we're talking about when you kind of offered a quip that our free press isn't maybe what we think it is. I think there's a lot of truth to that, other than I'm still allowed to talk on this microphone right now.
Absolutely. There are still bastions of the free press, and some people, such as yourself, brave broadcasters and journalists, who will pursue the truth no matter what the cost. I think, anyone who's maybe doubting what I'm saying should look into the case of Cheryl Atkinson, who was pretty much thrown right out of CBS because she was a little too curious about what happened in Benghazi.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing to me that journalists that are supposed to be covering the news aren't allowed to cover the news unless it's politically expedient to one position or another. Tell me, though, you talked about the founding of the Muslim Brotherhood. Who are they nowadays? What are they? More than, obviously they're in the Middle East. We're talking about them being in America. Are they worldwide? Are they regional? How do I interpret the size of the enemy?
So they are definitely worldwide. I always call them a stateless organization. So while they might have, one or two countries where they're very prominent, or maybe they're even in power in the government, what people need to remember is that this is a network of individuals, of front groups, of even businesses that operate in tandem and kind of work with each other. In the United States, you can see their presence in groups like CARE. So CARE is the Council on American Islamic Relations. This was, founded by two people very close to Hamas. And Hamas, literally in its charter, it says, this is the branch of the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine. So the Muslim Brotherhood is Hamas and vice versa, and therefore a very strong argument can be made they're CARE as well. It's not only CARE, it's also the Islamic Society of North America, it's the Muslim Public Affairs Council, it's the Muslim American Society, the Muslim Students Association, and these are very, most of those groups are very big. For example, the Muslim Students Association is on 600 campuses or more in the United States and Canada. That might sound very, unimportant. What does it really matter if there's a Muslim group on these campuses? There are Catholic groups, or there are Jewish groups. But just last month, I believe, the Canadian military presented evidence that 11 of Canada's most prominent terrorists were actually connected to the MSA in Canada.
It gets a little bit confusing, frankly. I've had on the air a number of times a man that is the president of the Kurdish National Assembly of Syria, and so he's on the ground. He's very, very invested in seeking freedom for the Kurdish people. But the insight that he brought, or what he brought to the conversation, at least here, was a little bit confusing for me, and we probably won't have time to get real deep into it in this segment, but we'll at least get the juices flowing. Trying to get my head around the stance that our White House administration is taking in the Middle East and, frankly, domestically, on the issue of the Muslim Brotherhood, it's very confusing to me, because when I look into the Middle East, I look at the Kurdish people who have been, for hundreds and hundreds of years, have been liberty-orientated people, well documented. So I say that because it's not like a fleeting political fad that they're yelling for liberty. These people have historically been saying that. And the door has been open to our State Department, the White House, to these folks for several presidents until this president. And that door, from all of the folks that I've had on the air that are involved in that, it's just stopped. They've shut the door in these folks' face, which is, to me, is just overwhelming to think that we don't want to put boots on the ground, but clearly it will take boots on the ground. But for whatever reason, this administration isn't willing to deal with the Kurdish people, and yet this administration has on a number of occasions sided with the Muslim Brotherhood. I can't make that add up. Can you shed some light on that in a minute or two?
I'd love to. I mean, you make a great point. The Kurds have been there. They're an ancient people. Where they're living today is where they've lived for 1,000 or more years. They happen to be some of the most pro-American, pro-Israeli, people in the entire region. They are not extremists for the most part, and they, like I said, they're pro-Western. What this administration has put itself and this country in a position of is taking the advice of Muslim Brotherhood advisors in its inner circle, telling them how the Middle East should kind of shake out with the Arab Spring, et cetera. And certainly the agenda that the Muslim Brotherhood that they're pushing, it's an Islamic caliphate, not only in the region but in the world, and pretty simply that leaves absolutely no room for the Kurds, who are for the most part moderates and not interested in living under Sharia law.
It's fascinating because when I read the Kurdish platform, if you will, it looks like Thomas Jefferson wrote it. I mean, I've said that several times on my show, but these folks want local sovereignty. They want freedom of religion. As you pointed out, they're great allies to Israel, and yet they're Muslim. They are moderate. They do seek liberty stances for all people, and we just seem to be, as a country, on the wrong side of history with that. But listen, William, we've got to go to a break. We're going to pick up where we left off. We'll be back in just a moment.
Renegade River in Spring Lake wants to buy your used handguns and hunting guns. Renegade River, your hunting, camping, and survival store. Stop in and check out their new and used firearms, sporting goods, Army and Navy supplies, and survival gear. Downtown Spring Lake, next to the police station.
Welcome back to the Mike Hewitt Show. Today with me is William Palumbo, who is the founder of the Coalition of Concerned Citizens, a group of researchers, retired military analysts, and journalists focused on exposing the Muslim Brotherhood network here within the United States. William, welcome back.
Thank you.
Listen, when we went to break, we were talking obviously about the Muslim Brotherhood, but tell me what I mean. They're all over the world. They're obviously in different embedded in different organizations. But what do they want? What's their goal?
Sure. You could almost add to that. Why should anybody here care? Right. This organization was founded in 1928 after the fall of the last Islamic state, the Ottoman Empire. What they want is a caliphate in the United States, and certainly, I should say, in the world, which includes the United States. And that means that everybody lives under strict Islamic law, something called Sharia law. This is the same law that the Taliban haven't had people living under. This is essentially the same law that the Islamic State, ISIS, has people living under. This is the same law that bin Laden wanted us living under. So when people say, well, what do they want? What's their concern? Their concern is the fact that we're not living as ultra-devout, observant Muslims. We're living as, Americans, as Christians, as Hindus, as Jews, or whatever people choose to live like here. Unfortunately, it's not just a passive group, and they don't seek to achieve this caliphate by passive means. They're very active, and that includes, passing laws. That includes intimidating people in public, and that also includes, of course, terrorism, when people remember that Hamas is an official branch of this organization.
What gets a little confusing about it when we get into the founding of it, and I think understanding who these people are and where they're from is important to trying to get our head around how to defend ourselves. And by the way, on that note, I think we must defend ourselves. It's not something that we can ignore, which is why I've had a number of guests, including you, on the show about, I think it's life and death. It's not an important thing we ought to pay attention to. I think it's life and death. Having said that, when I look at, you mentioned the Ottoman Empire, but when I look at the boundaries of the last Ottoman Empire, keeping in mind, folks, that Ottoman Empire started in 1200 and something BC or 1200 and something AD and went all the way through, 1928. But when I look at the borders of it, and then I set that map aside and I look at where the vast bulk of the Kurdish people are, it's clear as a bell that the Kurdish people are what's left of the original Ottoman Empire. They're all still in the same spots. And in fact, the president of the Kurdish National Assembly that I mentioned having on, he offered this. He said, imagine having a family home that's been many, many generations, home that's been in your family for 400 years, and suddenly you're referred to as an illegal immigrant. And so it's a very, very different environment than I think America is interested in. But the reason I wanted to focus on that part of the debate for a moment, or the dialogue for a moment, is that I don't know that it's necessarily that there's a difference between the Ottoman Empire and a caliphate. The very, very different government structures, very different agendas. One is a theocracy. I don't know that the Ottoman Empire was necessarily a theocracy, at least not with the vast bulk of its populace, and maybe that was one of the things that caused its final demise, was that push back and forth. But if these folks get a caliphate, if they're able to cause themselves a country with borders, to one of your points, what do you think what would they do then if they get their goal of a caliphate? What's their next step?
Well, I think that they have declared, of course, the caliphate in the border region between Iraq and Syria already. So, according to these people, they've already have a place to start. What they'll do from here is they'll certainly try to consolidate power in the Middle East, in North Africa, in Saudi Arabia, in the Arabian Peninsula, and then they'll basically what they'll do is they'll push east into Asia. So they'll go into Iran, and then Afghanistan, and then Pakistan, and they certainly want India too. And this is the traditional boundaries of the caliphate, and of course Africa. And it depends how far they get into sub-Saharan Africa. Once they have that established, and that's certainly not a foregone conclusion at this point, I think that if the American government were to wake up, or I should say, if we would get some new leadership who wasn't working in tandem with these people, what they'll do next is they'll do the same thing the last time they had a caliphate, is they'll start mounting raids on Europe, and they'll try to begin taking Spain and the Balkans, and they'll go into France and Austria, and that's really kind of the history of Islam in the West, is a series of wars and conquests and a back and forth like that. I think it's important to understand that Islam, the way it was founded and the way it spread, was really through the sword, and it's not when people take it very seriously, people say fundamentalism. Fundamentalist Muslims is kind of a euphemism. Really, it's a euphemism for terrorists, and that certainly in the last 100 years has proved to be a pretty accurate statement.
Muslim Brotherhood was pushed out of Egypt. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, they were pushed out. Well, they're still very active, but they're not in power.
Okay, and that was largely opposed by the White House.
Absolutely, yes.
And so I'm by the way, I'm agreeing with your presentation of who and what the Muslim Brotherhood is, It is in keeping with all of the rest of the guests that have been experts on this topic. And when I when I get done agreeing with you, I stand back again. What is our White House thinking? Forget the White House administration. What is President Obama thinking to embrace these folks? I honestly don't understand. That for me, as a layman, they look bloodthirsty and anxious to convert a world that doesn't necessarily want to be converted. Can you imagine the women in America wearing a burqa and telling them they can't drive?
No.
I mean, these things are not going to happen. So you know, we know that it is an absolute foolhardy non-reality. What their long-term goal is simply not going to happen. But a lot of people are going to get killed in the interim, and that causes me to say, what is President Obama thinking? What do you think he's thinking?
I don't know what he's thinking. Personally, I think we should remember that before he was elected, or I think maybe it was right after he was elected, he said, we're just a couple days away from fundamental transformation. And I don't think those were just idle words. I don't think they were something off the top of his head. I think he had something very distinct in mind. And looking into what we've been doing with this coalition and the amount of research we've compiled, if you look at many of the policies, the domestic policies he's put into place, and then the scandals, whether it's the IRS targeting of Tea Party, conservative constitutionalist groups, or the fact that DHS now labels quote unquote sovereign citizens, i.e., people who own guns and follow the law, as the major terrorist threat. I think that a strong argument can be made just looking at the fact that that President Obama has nothing good in mind for the United States, and he's actually using the Muslim Brotherhood as his support network to create some kind of a dictatorship here. And every day he comes out, really it's been for the last 2 weeks, saying that he's going to pass laws without Congress. That's not constitutional. That's actually illegal. But that is fully in line with what Turkey's president would say: use democracy until you get off of it, the train until you get off of it. And that's kind of exactly what every tyrant in history has done.
Mostly, though, in the past, the presidents, whether they be a Democrat or you take JFK as an example, John Kennedy did not want to hurt America. Ask not what if you look at the quotes and what he campaigned on, forget his personal life. If you looked at what he was trying to advance, those things were positive. I didn't agree with all of them, by the way, but they weren't policies that were destructive to our system of government or to us as a culture. And I say that because I think that there's been some relevance throughout American history, whether it was a Democrat or a Republican or a Whig or anybody in between. Most of the presidents, if not all of them until now, had the better mind of what was best for America. That was their goal. Whether they were right or wrong or not's a separate argument. They didn't want to hurt us. And I just don't see that right now. I honestly don't. I'm not able to say that. And an example is when I look at Iran, and I think, how can we? Even Jimmy Carter adopted the policies that George W. Bush continued. Now, I say that because both sides of the spectrum had endorsed letting sanctions take effect, and they did take effect. That's why Iran came to the negotiation table. Now we've removed them, and we've taken away their motivation to fly straight, for lack of better words. And I sit and I think, why would we do that? What's the difference in this president? And I look at the little difference, like Valerie Jarrett, who was born in Iran. She's a senior advisor to the President of the United States, and she was born in Iran. Why isn't that headline news? Honest, I don't know what. Forget the president even for a minute. I don't know what the American people are thinking to not be up in arms saying this is too much, enough.
Yeah. I mean, I think you put your finger right on the problem there with Valerie Jarrett. I think if you talk to some people about the night of Benghazi and what happened there when the people, when our ambassador, when the protection unit, when the SEALs were calling for reinforcements, and AFRICOM was ordered to stand down. It's my understanding that the person who gave that order not to come to the rescue of these people in Benghazi was actually Valerie Jarrett.
Right. What's frustrating, though, William, is that in America the paradigm is if you're a Republican, you're going to attack him, and if you're a Democrat, you're going to defend him, period. And we've got to stand back from those two paradigms for a moment and say, let's look at the facts. And the facts are pretty fearsome.
Yeah, they all point to the fact that this administration is not pro-American. It has no interest in helping Americans. It's as Admiral Lyons, a retired four-star general, used to be the head of the Pacific Fleet. He said the administration is pro-Muslim Brotherhood, it's pro-Iranian, and it's anti-American and anti-Western. I mean, does it need to be any clearer?
No, it really doesn't. Tell me, and this is now that we're on this topic, that leads me to the next question. How does the Muslim Brotherhood, how are they influencing us other than the White House? Are there other mechanisms that they're able to move our United States government in their direction that they've got access to?
They really are very active on many, many levels. So it's not only the federal government, they're also very active across the states. And the question is, well, what are they doing with all this power? One thing they're doing is, they're setting up, believe it or not, they're setting up neighborhoods for immigrant Muslims, refugees in many cases, to come and settle down in local populations. Now, if you keep that in mind for just a second, and you think about what came out earlier this week, that the White House is coordinating with groups around the country for these immigrants, they're actually setting up. It's a terrible word to use, but it's the proper word, ghettos. They're setting up immigrant ghettos that they say they're not encouraging to assimilate with the population. So what they're really doing is setting up what they have in Europe, I guess you could say, no-go zones.
Right.
They're also facilitating massive mosque building. If you look at the number of mosques that have been built in the United States since let's say the 1970s on, and then you kind of break it, and then you do from 2009 on, you'll see from 2009 on, there's been a tremendous push, a tremendous jump in the number of mosques in this country, and I think the number at this point is, I could be quoting this wrong, but something like 2,200 mosques. That's a lot of mosques.
President Obama told us that the Muslim or Islam as a faith as part of the American fabric and has been here since before our founding.
Well, I think one of our first wars was against the Barbary pirates, who were a colony of the Ottoman Empire. Right,
and I got to tell you, I tend to be a Jeffersonian, and so as that, I'm a non-interventionist, and Thomas Jefferson is probably the leader of that kind of ideology, and yet he was forced to go to engage these folks to stop them from terrorizing us, even as the third president of the United States. I say that because this is not a fresh war. This isn't something new. We may have the luxury of not, as citizens in our daily lives, not paying attention to it, but it's getting more intense. But it's been here since our founding. That much of what the president said is true.
Well, he just has us on the wrong side.
Yeah, he really truly does. But it doesn't. I guess doesn't. It doesn't. Tell me about Qatar. Am I saying it right?
Yep, you did. You actually said it right. A lot of people, people pronounce it in many different ways.
Yeah, every time I say that word, I got to sneak up on it. So.
Well, why would anyone say it if it weren't the strange world we're living in today? What it is, it's a tiny little backwards. Really, it's a backwards country that sticks out of Saudi Arabia. It has about 300,000 citizens, and it has about, let's say, 1.5 million expats, many of them who are literally slaves. They have their passport seized when they walk in the door and they can't leave. And what Qatar has become really is the headquarters of the Muslim Brotherhood network, especially their financial network. So, Qatar sits on the third largest natural gas reserves in the entire world. And like I said, it has 300,000 citizens, and it's small enough such that the royal family more or less runs the government and all of the quote-unquote institutions in that country as a family business. And the family business at this point is basically the Muslim Brotherhood. It's a clearinghouse for terrorist funds. It's been called an ATM for terrorists. And maybe this sounds insignificant. Why do I care about this small little country with these crazy people running around funding terrorists that are far away from me? People need to remember that basically what Qatar has done with their enormous wealth is they've bought into American institutions, real American institutions. They have tremendous contracts with Boeing and Lockheed Martin.
Hey, William, let me stop you for a minute. I've got to
Sure.
take us to a break, so we're going to pick right up where you left off in just a minute, folks. We'll be right back.
Be a survivor, not a statistic. Renegade River in Spring Lake has new and used handguns, hunting guns, sporting goods, and survival gear. Protect your rights and your freedom. Ask about their CPL classes. Renegade River, next to the police station at downtown Spring Lake.
Welcome back to the Mike Hewitt Show. My guest today is William Palumbo, who is the founder of the Coalition of Concerned Citizens, a group of researchers, retired military analysts, and journalists focused on exposing the Muslim Brotherhood network in the United States. William, welcome back.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah, when we left off, we were talking about Qatar, and one of the things you'd mentioned in that was their population is 300 and some thousand. And just while we were at break, I had to do some Googling just because I've got this iPad in front of me and I couldn't help myself. But that puts them about half the size of Detroit, or just a hair less than the population of Cleveland. And yet, with those small numbers, because of the natural resources they have, they wield a tremendous amount of international influence. Behind politics is money, and with the Muslim Brotherhood behind the ideology or the theology, I should say, is money, and that gives them a pretty big bat to swing. Am I correct in saying that?
Oh, you are absolutely correct, and it's easy for people's eyes to glaze over and they're kind of lose focus here. But the whole point and the whole story is actually very straightforward. Once you remember that the Muslim Brotherhood is headquartered in Qatar, and then you remember all the money they have and where they put this money all around Washington, D.C., whether it's in Georgetown, whether it's the Brookings Institution. They have contracts with their defense manufacturers. There's a Chamber of Commerce in Doha. They use this influence to push their political agenda, or as they would say, their religious agenda, which is political Islam or the Muslim Brotherhood. One big example of that is the Arab Spring. If you look at the United States policy through the Arab Spring, it wasn't just that we came up with it on our own. It wasn't that the American government had something in mind. No, an idea was put there very specifically by the Muslim Brotherhood, by the Qataris, where they're based, to overthrow, secular governments in the Middle East and North Africa and install Muslim Brotherhood parties into these areas. That happened in Egypt, Libya. They've basically done that, but they've turned it into Afghanistan. It happened in Tunisia, and we're trying to this day, to make it happen in Syria. And that's really the problem with Qatar, is that they have so much money and so much influence that they've basically made the American military a tool to push their own agenda, which is extraordinarily immoral and very, very dangerous.
It absolutely is. It almost reminds me, hating to be shrill myself, but of the old novel 1984, or rather Animal Farm, where all of the words meet opposite of what they actually do. It's just a fascinating circumstance America finds itself in, and almost inescapable. We have to take action.
Yes, I agree. We absolutely do need to take action.
Do you know what are some of the groups and organizations these folks work within to advance their what I think of as sickness?
Well, there's certainly almost virtually every Islamic organization in the country. If they're big enough to have a name and a website, they're probably funded in one way or another by the Muslim Brotherhood or the Saudis. So There's one place to start. And the money that they've put into academia has had a tremendous influence. In fact, just yesterday I read that Northwestern University, working with Harvard University, is setting up a Sharia law school. This isn't a joke. They're setting up a Sharia law school in Doha, Qatar. So that's Harvard University, of course, in Boston, and Northwestern in Chicago, actually consulting with the government of Qatar to set up a Sharia law school whose goal is to export that worldwide. So when you look at the money in academia and all the universities that are in Qatar, you start to get an idea of why this is so difficult to address. It's not that it's necessarily on the grassroots level. It's basically that they've taken over our intelligentsia, and we're supposed to take these people seriously when they tell us that, drawing a picture of Muhammad means that we're all of a sudden candidates to be shot to death.
For me, it's always follow the money. And we talked a little bit throughout. You've given us some clues about where some of their money comes from. But listen, folks, some of their money comes from you and I. The President Obama, and this is back in 2012, President Obama bypassed Congress and gives $1.5 billion to the Muslim Brotherhood. I read that and I think how many Americans, working Americans, tax-paying Americans, the 53% that are still working and contributing to our federal government in the form of taxes, if you do the math on it, how many of their entire annual contributions, it took a lot of people to gift their entire annual contributions. I'm always hearing some congressman or senator somewhere say, why are we arguing over this? It's only $1 billion. Holy moly, how many people did it take to contribute their entire annual contribution to come up with $1.5 billion? Folks, we've got to start looking at what we're doing with our money and who's actually paying it a little closer, just a little bit closer. That's my feeling of it. When we're one of their benefactors. They're our enemy, and we're paying them.
Yeah, and just to update what you were saying, when Morsi was elected president of Egypt, because Obama decided that Mubarak should resign, even though he was, really the linchpin of stability in the entire region. He gave Morsi's government, the Muslim Brotherhood government of Egypt, $8 billion. So, I think
to me it's just incredible. But listen, we can feel safe because we've got a pure, snow-driven, pure Homeland Security taking care of us, and they have no fingers in the pot with the Muslim Brotherhood. Am I right in saying that?
You would be very wrong, because based on the research...
William, are you saying I shouldn't feel all warm and fuzzy right now?
I'm saying I don't know whether they should fund or defund DHS, because both are bad options.
Yep, you're exactly right with that. And that's turned into an organization that is all that it promised to be, right even with the name of it, Homeland Security. It sounds like something out of a different era for a different country, but it's turned into be a big political ball that gets bantered, unfortunately, in the wrong corner. And again, it goes to follow money, because money motivates a lot of U.S. citizens that are engaged in that, and it doesn't have anything to do with necessarily with their politics or their theology, but they're financially motivated, and there's a lot of money stirring in that pot. And the Muslim Brotherhood are very deep in it. The more I researched, the more ugly it got. Is that a true statement?
No, you couldn't be more right about that. I mean, we just to give your listeners a very quick idea, we looked into 7 individuals who were suspected of being Muslim Brotherhood in the administration. And of those, 4 of them were advisors to the Department of Homeland Security. And one of them was very vocal on Twitter and actually praised someone who said in so many words that the white man is the enemy and there should be a genocide of white people. That his name is Muhammad El Biari, and he quoted